Hey there, welcome to Better Talks the podcast.
I'm Rick.
And I am Oscar. And today we are joined by Lisa Hoving, who is a big data engineer and Microsoft Data Platform MVP. Welcome, Lisa.
Morning.
Hello. So, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you guys?
Awesome, actually. It's always nice to be able to do podcast recordings, and especially when we have you as a guest today.
Yeah.
So you're a big data engineer, and that's something that over the last couple of years, it's been mentioned a lot, right? Big data is the new oil.
It became big, you're saying, or not?
Yeah.
Bigger. Yeah,
wow.
True.
Okay, but could you explain what is it that you do on a day-to-day basis, and where do you big data engineer?
Where does a big data engineer the big data? Yeah, that's a good question.
That's the one.
So basically what I do day to day is I mainly focus on the Azure side of things. Mm-hmm. So my work is basically all in the cloud, which I think is great. And I think as a big data engineer, what I find the most interesting about it is that you actually have to be kind of an architect, a DevOps engineer, a cloud engineer, and a developer all in one. So I really get to be a part of the engineering from beginning to an end, I would say. And I think that's pretty diverse, but also pretty great.
And I can imagine it might also be hard on some of your colleagues that you are involved in so many parts of developing a certain system or a certain data structure, right?
Yeah, I think, there's plenty of reasons why it can be hard on my colleagues to work with me, I suppose. I'm not sure if that's one of the things, but yeah, having a very diverse environment, that can be pretty challenging from time to time. And the lessons, I guess, can be quite harsh. But yeah, getting to work with all these different technologies, in that case, your day is never, it's never going to be the same from one day to another. So one day, maybe I'm working on creating a pipeline for deployment in DevOps and to make sure that the code, can be deployed in a way that is automated. And also you can do unit testing and stuff like that. And maybe the next day I'll be working on PySpark, programming Spark on Databricks and coding and unit testing and stuff like that. And, maybe another day I will have a chat with an architect and together we'll design the architecture that we'll use. And then I'm more later on into Bicep and stuff like that. So yeah, it can be pretty amazing.
It's broad, yeah. And for your role, like it's engineer, so I can imagine indeed, and I've been involved lately in some data projects, so I see how broad you quickly go because you need from source to usage. You go through so many steps with conversions and transformations, and indeed setting up those pipelines and adding some data. But are you also busy on the analysis side? So actually diving in, or is the actual question a bit abstract and then you're working on getting the data there, like technically?
Well, and that being mentioned also to ensure that you connect securely to data sets, which is a quite interesting topic on itself. But it depends a little bit on our customers, I would say, if I'm involved in the analysis or not. Usually, a customer would have a pretty clear idea on kind of what they would like or, kind of what end product they would like to have. So maybe they want to track customers in their funnel, like are they going to buy a product, yes or no, and stuff like that. But usually they don't really know what is in the data per se. And if they really don't have a clue or they don't know how the data is structured, then I do help them with that. So you go into the data, you're like, okay, is it a JSON? Is it a Parquet file? Is it CSV? Are we having complex data structures? Yes or no? And if so, kind of, what granularity do you need in that complex data structure and stuff like that? And yeah, that can be pretty awesome as well, I have to admit. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like for me, like in the last 2 months, like a whole world opened. And of course, I knew about data lakes and we used to do data warehouses in SQL. But now we're like using our internal data. Like we're a SaaS company, we do using our internal data a bit, and we started a real data project.
A big boy project.
Yeah. So, and of course, all the Azure side, like piece of cake, like connecting to a data source, like setting up a managed identity, connecting it to, and like, but the amount of tools there and the amount of different languages, and you mentioned Parquet files, and I know like most of the details from like it feels like 600 different Azure services, but this is this feels like again I'm at the forefront of because I went from what did we see? I was busy in Data Factory. I was busy in
Fabric, probably.
Fabric, in Databricks, in I got Fivetron running. We have Census, like all these tool sets. Like what? And like I'm now an owner of 12 new different SaaS tools.
Yeah,
it is ridiculous. How do you navigate that? Because it's a lot.
That's complicated, right? it is a lot. And how do I say this? So I think this is also one of the most interesting questions that you're asking when it comes to data engineering and data architecture. Because, just imagine that you don't have any knowledge on Azure itself and you want to do a data project. And then you have all these questions, right? Because you guys kind of know how to work on Azure. But if you don't even know how to do that, oh my gosh, how are you going to start your data project? And I think, even, and maybe this is a good question for Rick as well, like if you go to the Microsoft architecture page and you type in data lake and the architecture that you see there, I mean, they have tons of tools. And I always kind of wonder why, because from a logical perspective in your brain, if you go through all these tools, you think to yourself, well, there must be one tool per job, right? So if I do streaming, maybe I go for IoT hubs or something like that. Or if I want to go for batch processing, maybe I go for Databricks, stuff like that. But the truth behind it is this is just not the case. So with Databricks, for example, I can do streaming, I can do batch, I can do small amounts of data, I can do big amounts of data. And then when it comes to ADF, I have kind of a similar tool and I can do the same kind of use cases with that. So then how do you know what tool is the right one for you? And how do you make sure that you're not ending up with tons of tools? And that's very difficult.
Well,
I'd love to take the question.
Yeah, take the question. Do you know the answer? I didn't expect you knew. So
I don't know the answer, but I know part of it. So data in Azure has been evolving really hard lately, or actually maybe even the last 10 years. So we started out, we even had analysis services in Azure, which then went away. We had HD Insight. We've had Hadoop implementations. We've had our own implementations that just didn't work. And then we thought, well, maybe we don't need to do this. The thing is, I don't think it's mature yet. So if you look at, I think Data Lake, for instance, the solution itself, it being part of a storage account and it being, that works, right? But then we've added analysis on top of that, which actually made it important to add new tools because we couldn't do that with the existing tools. But the first implementation of that just wasn't enough. So Data Factory came just for moving data around and transforming it a little bit. But the requirements kept growing. So then analysis was added as far as Synapse Analytics, for instance, goes, which is a first evolution of Data Factory. But now we have Fabric, which is again an evolution of what we already had together with some new tools. So I really think...
And that doesn't make the navigation much more easy because sometimes I'm reading an article, it's like, oh, this sounds like the other product. And basically it is the other product, just got renamed again.
But there are edge cases where you should use one tool over the other tool where, one is more efficient and then you kind of don't know what you're...
To be honest, I think if we wait a couple of years, the playing field is going to be so much more clear because we're still in the process of investigating and evolving and learning and developing. Probably a couple of years from now, we will know, okay, so if you want to do something that has to do with tons and tons and tons of data, and it's, for instance, eventing data, probably you're good to go with Data Explorer, which is a service that not a lot of people know of, but it's huge and tremendous.
Very powerful.
Oh, yes, it is. But not a lot of people know Data Explorer, I think.
No, that is, but it's also like it's in the middle of those different realms, right? In like it's a data service, but for me, Data Explorer is a good fit because I'm used to my analysis on operations, right? So I'm used to writing Gusto, and it really works in my brain to reach data like that. But if you give that to someone in like from a data community writing Python all day and stuff, it might be a bit far from them.
Yeah,
so
totally.
I think that's why you also get the multiple blends there.
And I think the second part of the answer is also that Microsoft, and I think that's what they've been doing for the last couple of years, doesn't necessarily need you to run their service or their product, sorry. They need you to run it on Azure. So I think that's one of the things why they have Databricks in Azure. It's just because it makes it possible to run Databricks on an Azure environment, and you get the scalability that it entails while still remaining in Databricks. So everybody who already has the knowledge just stays there.
I think having Databricks on Azure is actually such a big thing, because the people like me, like when I went on Azure, I could already program Spark. At first, we would program that in Scala, but now more and more Python is used. So we're switching up to Python as well. And what is really, really great about Databricks is that this company is founded by the people who created Spark. So if you would like to have the newest version of Spark and, the latest innovations, then people would often go to Databricks. And I think having that capability is like a really huge thing on Azure. So for the company that I work for, Rabobank, we do often use Databricks, actually.
But I see Databricks a lot in the context of a Microsoft shop, because the integration in Azure, especially there, like it's so native, but it's something that Microsoft internally never built, and it's bridging the gap that you need, because it is of course it runs in your production environment. It's so different from a database, like one of those core components for your app. These because you deploy it, but it has a completely different lifecycle and dev test environment or whatever. You don't. It's not in the same level as your bicep script is the pipeline inside Databricks. Because if you would do this with Azure components, you want to do that through your whole pipeline, and you're looking at it as a developer building an app or whatever. It is different.
Oh yes.
Everything that lives in there is basically data. Like it has a different vision, and that's why it doesn't really fully fit. And especially if you go to the analysis tools for business, then they're more at the office side at Microsoft, right? You get the Power BI and whatever, and that's also alien comparing to an Azure environment. The way you deploy.
I have to admit, in my team we have quite a few Power BI specialists, and I can do nothing with Power BI because it's so different than what I'm. Yeah, I'm not used to that. Like I've done a few courses, but still, if I try to make something in Power BI, it will end up looking not so great. Let's put it like that.
No, but and I think, and I make the joke, it's Excel. Like for me, it feels like Excel. Like you have all the data in front of you, and then you filter it out and kind of duplicate some things to look like a group.
And it does have some very nice visuals, right?
It has visuals, like and behind it, like the Power Query and stuff. It's pretty cool. Like if you dive into it, but like for me, it's so unreachable. It's like I could do this in 5 minutes in a normal query, and it takes me a day to do it in Power BI. Or that's Fabric now as well, right?
Power BI is still a separate service. However, when you do Fabric, it also has Power BI.
Aha! I knew there was something.
Fabric is really...
I had a new logo, so...
I think Fabric is... Yeah, if you open up a Power BI report 9 out of 10 times, you see the Fabric logo. That's true.
Yeah.
But I think Fabric is more a culmination of several services put into one under the Fabric noemen goed in Dutch, but I don't know.
Yeah, group. Yeah,
the fabric group umbrella. Thank you. But I think we're really moving towards an even better way of doing data and analysis and that kind of stuff in Azure. I think we have made tremendous strides over the last couple of years, but I also think we're not there yet. I even think Fabric might not necessarily be a finished product yet, because some features are still lacking, or at least
no. But like as long as
par
there's a vision, then I think it is settling. Like and you see that also with the non-Microsoft players. You see the Snowflake. They're just buying companies, adding that to a service, and that's also a world on its own. Do you work with that, Lisa?
I have to admit, I've worked a little bit with Snowflake, but then specifically on AWS. I'm not sure if I dare to say that here,
no,
but scratch that. Yeah, we need to edit that from the podcast. No, but I've worked with that a little bit. I think it's great, but I don't really worked with it enough to really give a solid opinion on that. But what I do think is pretty interesting is that for now, we've talked about the data lakes, right? And how different that is actually from databases. But on Databricks, actually, we're already on the data lakehouse side of things. So we're one step ahead of that right now, which I think, that's pretty interesting too. Don't you think?
So maybe you can dive into that, because indeed, we were talking data warehouses, and at some point, data lake, just throw everything in there, we'll figure it out later. And now you hear the lakehouse term, even though in daily basis, I normally see a data swamp, but...
And it reeks so a little bit, right?
Like that's a totally different topic on its own. It's so easy to make it complicated. Yeah, this is true. So I think historically speaking, if you look at the data warehousing side of things, right? So that is where we started, I guess. And at that point in time, what you saw was that the storage was incredibly, expensive. So what they did was they coupled that storage with that computational power. And here you had like your data warehouse. And what they did really, really nicely was those asset transactions, right? So if you wrote something, then, you can be really, really sure that you can, for example, update rows. So maybe I have a table with, employees and where they live. And if somebody moves his house, then you update their record and you say, okay, well, Lisa has moved from Hilversum to Utrecht, something like that. And when we went to the data lake, what we would do is usually we store this in Parquet, but it's pretty similar for most formats. And there you cannot even update the record. So then all of a sudden, you're doing big data. So we decouple that storage from that computational power, which is great because now all of a sudden we have cheap storage and we can do like really, really big queries easily because you can just create a bigger cluster. Amazing. But then you think, okay, well, I need to update the record in Parquet and you get a big cross because that's just not possible. And what they did at that point was they created basically Delta, which is under the hood also Parquet, but with that log. And then it points to the correct file saying, okay, well, we updated this row. So now if you want to query that data, you need to look at this file, basically. And then you're kind of mixing and matching the pros from the data warehouse and the pros from the data lake. And then you get that data lakehouse.
It's nice, right? It's nice, right? I mean, it just continues to grow. And then if you move into Fabric a little bit more, we used to have a data lake. And now in Fabric, it's called a one lake.
Yes.
Because it's the one location where all of your data is. And even they can now use shortcuts to pull in data into the lake, except it doesn't really copy it. It just reaches out to the original location of the data.
It's like adapter pattern for you. Like it's just, but it makes sure you have your access. But that also makes it so like all the enterprise use cases I completely see. But if you're building an app and you separate environments and stuff, this stuff is like I don't dare to touch it because I might expose something bad. Like the security side on that one is you need a team on that.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
So I've always heard quite a few roles when it comes or when we talk about data, right? So you have data engineers, you have data analysts, you have data scientists, you have ML engineers. So we dove right into the details right here, but could you maybe explain a little bit about what those different types of roles are and just to make it clear who does what a little bit?
Yeah. I think it's pretty confusing. Even my family will go out and they will say like, yeah, my dad will say, oh, my daughter is a data scientist. And then I say, no, Dad, I'm a data engineer. And
only on the weekend.
Yeah. Then my dad says, yeah, but data scientist just sounds more fancy. So I will tell people you're a data scientist.
Tell them I'm a pilot then.
Yes. Well, co-pilot.
Co-pilot. There we go.
Yeah, we said it.
We got our AI reference for the episode.
Yeah. So how I would usually view it is, you have to think about it from a data lifecycle perspective. So if we start in the beginning, you would find that if you don't have any data infrastructure, let's say we want to do a data use case, right? So let's say we have some data on sales and we would like to, calculate what salesperson outperformed per month. Then we need some infrastructure first to get that done. So first we design that infrastructure. And of course, usually that is done either by a data engineer or if the company is bigger, an architect. Mm-hmm. And we design that infrastructure. But then, of course, you would need to deploy that infrastructure as well. So you would need a cloud engineer or a DevOps engineer, or again, if the company is pretty small, you would use a data engineer and they would do that. Then you have your infrastructure and you have your design, hopefully. Hopefully you don't deploy the infrastructure before the design, ?
Maybe it is the design then, but yeah.
And then you can kind of get started, right? So what a data engineer would do for you is make sure that you're connected to your data sources in a secure manner. And of course, if we want to calculate what salesperson outperformed per month, then you want to do that in an automated way. So what a data engineer will do is it will pre-process that data for you in an automated manner so that it gets to the source every day or every month or whatever you like, and that everything is secure. Hopefully. It's very important. So if we have that data pre-processed there, because the data sets are never clean by itself, so somebody has to clean it first, then it can be used. So for a data analyst, they will go through the data and they would say, well, we can do with the data this and this and this, or there are some more use cases to this data, or, hey, I see that this data is not yet cleaned. Can we change that and stuff like that? So they will dive into the data and get some insights with that. So that's like usage. And then when it comes to data scientists, they will be more like, well, maybe we can actually predict what salesperson will outperform next month. And that's more like predictive modeling or explaining. So why did this person outperform this and this month using these data science models, so to speak? And then when it comes to, machine learning engineers, they would use machine learning, obviously. And then we also have BI specialists, and they would make a very fancy dashboard. So if you look at it end to end, basically a data engineer would make sure that the data gets to the right place in the right way, automated, securely. Then the analyst will analyze the data scientist will try to make predictions, and the BI specialist will create, the insights in a dashboard so that management can also use it.
So in the end, you always have all these roles, and the bigger the company is, these roles will be either individuals or even teams. So and like if you're really small, you're probably have the one person that knows a bit about it, does everything. I think it's a good explanation indeed between indeed.
I think it might be the clearest explanation I've ever heard about the different roles in data science.
I'm happy I wasn't too far off with my vision on it, but indeed, and you don't need everything, right? Like you have a lot of companies that don't really do data science. They go mostly for the business insights straight away. So, and if you can get everything from a single source, everything is less complex. Maybe because in that middle part, because I think that's most interesting for me to see the transformations there and the cleaning and joining. Like what I've now working with this a bit is the and that was completely new for me. The insight about the bronze, silver, gold kind of vision,
the medallion architecture.
Yeah. Can you explain how that works? Because that was for me, it's like, oh, that is actually well thought out.
I need to admit, I really like the idea of the medallion architecture. So the bronze, silver, gold. Some people will call it role-defined derived, and you have multiple ways of indicating the same thing.
Yeah.
Some people don't understand the idea behind the medallion architecture, but that's just an opinion, right? So I think the idea by itself is really solid. So the role layer is to get data in as is. So the idea behind data lakes is that you might have 10, 20, 1,000 different data sources, and you take all of these data sources into your data lake. So the first step would be to make an as-is copy from that. So if you're a big company, maybe you will have data for, as I said, your employees, and you have data for your sales, and you might have data for clicks on your website, things like that. So
even mapping that out, right? Like what is the origin of what data point, and how do we get it in reverse ETL, or like what tooling do we need there? Like that's already something, and that's, I think, already the big difference between 20 years ago. We had one SQL server, so everything was on there.
Yep.
But continue. Sorry.
Yeah, nowadays that is totally different, but you might still have that SQL server running. So you would pull that data to your data lake as well. So that's the first step to getting your data lake ready, is to not only connect to these data sources, but also to grab that data and put it on your data lake. And the first step would be there is to do it as is. And that's a step that a lot of people sometimes tend to miss. And if you don't do it, it will get really, really complicated fast, because the retention on your source might not be the same as in your data lake. And then if you do like transformations immediately, you cannot go back, right? So you don't know where the data is coming from or what the raw data looked like. So it's very important to, in your raw layer or your bronze layer, to pull the data as is. And then what we're going to do in the defined layer or in the silver layer is to clean the data sets and these data sets. And the rules that are applied here differ a little bit from company to company. But the idea behind it is that in the silver layer, we have data sets that are ready for investigation. So data analysts can go to that silver layer and be certain that that data is ready for analysis and the bugs are already, cleaned out, so to say.
But it's cleaning, and it's also joining those data sources, right, at that level. So
that's what I mentioned. So some people will have different ideas behind that. So some people will say, no, you cannot join data sets in the silver layer or in the defined layer. And other people will say, yes, that's totally fine. Don't worry about it. And even some companies will say, well, in the silver layer or in the defined layer, we have data sets that are ready for production, so ready to share with the world. And some companies will say, no, this is only for analysis purposes. So the silver defined layer, only we can do analysis on it. Because the idea behind the gold layer or derived, whatever you call it, the idea behind that is that this is where the data sets are that are ready to be shared with the world. So maybe we join 10 different data sets and we aggregate something, and then, the data where we built our dashboards on and stuff like that is in that gold layer.
Yeah, but you can, and indeed that differs, I think, by experience and the place where you're trying to use it, because you might have a department doing your BI, making your dashboard, so you can trust them. You could give them pretty raw data. You can trust them. But you can also imagine that some departments you want to have, well, that would definitely define as gold, I would say, just an endpoint and let them play around with Excel and Power BI themselves. So, and then you need to have your security in order. You need to make sure that every assumption's in there, that stuff joins up and stuff is already defined and checked. Because if you make a mistake there, like business decisions are made, right? Like it's different than a report, because that is pretty testable and static than exposing a lot of data.
I think in the end, the rules should be not that we're very strict, but that we are very clear about the rules that we have. So it doesn't really matter what rules you adhere to what layer, as long as you're consistent. So I've even had companies, especially smaller companies, that are like, yeah, Lisa, this is nice, but I only have, let's say, 3 data sets, and I'm making 3 layers for what?
Yeah.
So in that case, I would say, well, always take that raw or bronze layer, because you want to have these data sets as is. This is like non-negotiable, because if you don't, at some point you want to go back in time and you can't. So you need to have it. But maybe for the gold layer and defined layer, you can create it, in one. Because if you only have a small amount of data, why create 3 layers for this? Yep. That makes no sense. But as long as if you have a smaller team and you basically have the same person making the reports as making that layers, like why would they limit themselves? Like I cannot look at the other one now. Like it's and it is work, right? Because you have to get these data sets in an automated way throughout these layers, and to have an extra step that you don't use. Yeah, that sucks.
We got to make it work, right? And not do it because we want to do it or because we quote unquote have to.
Yeah.
But just do it because it works, right? Oscar, do you know what time it is?
Is it time for a totally random question?
It is time for a totally random question. Lisa, if you could have any tech-related superpower, what would it be and how would you use it?
I would have a superpower where if I have a bug, I immediately know where in my code it is.
You don't enjoy debugging?
No, for some weird reason I do not. No.
Well, I think it all depends on time pressure and the annoyance of a bug. But sometimes I can be really happy when I find a bug after 3 hours of searching.
That's it. Like, the moment is going to come that you're like, aha, and you feel really proud or really stupid. It doesn't matter. For me, that's most fun. Like,
it might happen under the shower. You think, but wait a minute.
Yeah, it's like waking up middle of the night. I know it.
But you don't like the process, so you would rather instantly know where it is and then just fix it and go on with it.
By nature, I am impatient. Yeah. So if I see a bug and I don't know where it is from, that annoys me. Yeah.
I can imagine.
Are you sure you're in the right business?
Sometimes I think, wow, because I know a lot about data, right, and Azure, but I know very little about computers and everything, surrounding that. So often I will just find myself having an issue and getting angry and then giving my computer to my boyfriend who does audio engineering, and then he's able to fix it quicker than I do. So sometimes I think, I don't know.
I think that's actually...
He secretly turns it off and on.
But I think that's actually something that's really interesting that you're saying there, because I think the software industry, and I mean, I also mean data and that kind of stuff around that, has progressed so far that now you can be very technical on the data level and not necessarily know how you fix certain computer things, right?
That's abstraction,
True.
right? You don't have to know how to build an engine to drive a car.
You don't?
Well, some of us still want to know, but I think it's good to know at least one abstraction,
that
maybe
it has an engine.
Under what you're using.
Yeah.
Like Hanselman always says, like I want my kids to learn how to drive with a stick shift. Like for us, it's normal here, of course, but to at least have some sense of what's happening, that if something is wrong or something feels incorrect. And I think that goes back to debugging.
Yep.
If something doesn't work and the abstraction is blocking you from understanding what's happening, and I think for you also, like you will go back to a connector, there are so many abstractions once in data world, I would say, that you don't have to know the implementation, but like even something as seeing a ridiculous cost last week somehow on the bill and knowing that some cluster ran off and then understanding it's like, I actually don't need the compute. I just needed the storage or stuff like that. Those underpinnings, like, so that's not a computer anymore, because that's like 50 levels down before it becomes a computer in this work. And I don't know. I think if you're older, you might still remember a lot of stuff.
Why are you looking at me?
Because I'm looking in a mirror. Like, no, but like we needed to know assembly for x86, right?
Yep.
Because that's how you learned IT, and after that, just the abstractions went wild. Like, and we were all building them. I don't think it's necessary, but I do think it's necessary to look a bit deeper. Otherwise, bugs are just a support ticket for you. You get IT work now that it's like then your tool might be like the deepest that you go. You're basically using a tool. But I think for data, it's still somewhere in the middle, right?
So some of these lessons that you mentioned, like the costs and stuff like that, these are lessons that we've all had and learned from, and they kind of hurt. And, then you move on from that and you learn and you think, okay, well, these are the options for next time, basically.
You don't learn from success, right?
Hey, sometimes you gotta run into a scar to
you don't learn from a success.
Yeah.
Like if everything works and you didn't even plan it, like that's just luck. But you need
I've
to
been
run
very
into
lucky.
something.
I've had projects where we were very lucky.
Same. Yeah.
I would like to switch gears a little bit, because one of the things that you are really open and maybe even passionate about is the fact that you are very open on your neurodivergence, right?
Yeah.
And you're actually an active advocate of knowing how to cope with such things, knowing how to cope with colleagues that are neurodivergent. I could ask where the passion comes from, but that's probably because you experienced it yourself. But what made you make the choice to be such an active advocate about it?
I think it's a good question. I sometimes wonder that myself, like, what motivated me to do this in the first place. And I think, honestly, it was kind of the feeling when I got my autism diagnosis, for example, right? So at that point, I was like 14 to 16 years old, something like that. And at that point, it was a totally different world, actually, when it comes to neurodiversity than now. So one of the first things that I was told by my psychologist was basically like, Lisa, you're autistic and all, but if you want to have a chance at a real career and at people listening to you and not to face too much prejudice, then it's best to be silent about it. And that's actually a lesson that I took with me for a very long time, until at some point you're just like, well, F it, because you want to be open about these things because they're a part of who you are. And I didn't really see many people speaking about neurodiversity or more specifically autism in the community. So I thought, you know what, I'm just going to give it a shot and, give that middle finger back to my psychologist and just say, we're going to be open about it, And I do hope that when other people see me, that they know, hey, if Lisa can do it, then I can also be open about it. And it doesn't have to mean that your, company says, oh, we don't want you anymore. Yeah.
But I saw you speak on this topic at Azure Lowlands, where I was actually helping, and I had the pleasure of having Lisa in the room that I was monitoring. it really stood out to me how many people walked up to you after the talk and specifically went there to thank you and to be, well, they were very appreciative of the fact that you made it a topic that you can talk about, right?
Yeah, and I think the reactions that I get to talking about this is, well, insane actually. I never expected that, but being open about my own, well, struggles, but also, wins, really enables other people to be open about it as well. And in that case, you also see, the need that other people have to talk about it. And you see that people are still afraid to talk about it in the workplace. And I think, yeah, just being open already helps in that conversation to be a little bit more open.
And I think it's very good that you do so, because it's a topic that I do think has gotten a lot more attention over the past couple of years. We've now seen events where they have either quiet rooms or petting rooms where you can actually just wind down a bit and just get your act together again, right?
Yeah.
But still, it's something that a lot of people cope with or have to deal with. So it's very good to talk about
and
that.
I think it's both, like you're also saying, like, oh, didn't realize so many people that come up to you and tell you about it. But there are even a few that don't even come up to you, tell you about it, that are really inspired.
Yeah.
And I think also people that are not struggling with this will go further in their thinking, in their openness.
It
like,
gives insight, right?
And maybe find out, it's like, oh, but like this is actually a good thing. Like you need to have some quiet time or thinking time, and everyone acts different in different situations. Some people think I'm an extrovert. I think I'm an introvert. I've never been officially diagnosed for anything, but I love to be alone. And like also those advancements in having that at a conference or whatever. Like, it's awesome. I really love it, and I also really love to hear a story like that. That if I see someone in a team or whatever, like, and struggles with that can be open, then that I also know how to act, how to take pace or ask what they want, or it's, you don't have that. You need insight. Someone needs to open up. And I think in our, like, honestly, in our tech world, I think we also have a more, I think it can be a superpower, like any divergence anywhere. Like sometimes also I have worked with some people diagnosed with ADHD. No one can beat them at sometimes. Like they can be really
If they go into hyperfocus, then have them go.
And like see it as your superpower. Like it's part of you. Like you have your character also because of that. And I think if everyone's open for that, like, shouldn't be that much in the way on a day-to-day basis.
True, it's very true. And how I try to treat it in my team, at least, is a little bit like cultural differences, right? So in my team, I have somebody from Egypt, I have somebody from India, some from the US, originally from China, someone from Turkey, etc., etc. Even somebody from Indonesia, for example. So, and these people also have different ways in communicating.
Yeah.
So what we try to do is you try to meet each other somewhere halfway, because these ways of communicating are different. So, like I'm not going to be very, very direct to somebody who is from Indonesia, for example. That's just, not the way you communicate like that. So you try to meet each other halfway, and he will try to be a little bit more direct to me, for example. And you also see this in the way that autistic people communicate, for example, and people with ADHD communicate. And of course, there are major differences here because these groups are extremely diverse. But what I always try to do is, I try to adjust my communication a little bit, but other people also try to meet me halfway there. And when it comes to unmasking and things that I need that don't affect other people, I just try to take that space. For example, with like more flexible hours, something like that. So I would start my day at 9:30, sometimes even 10 o'clock. And yeah, if it doesn't hurt somebody, why not? And another day you might work a little bit longer. Yeah, what does it matter?
Yeah, I think it's all contributes to a really good open culture. And I think like all forms of diversity also really is proven that in the end you're building better products because people using your stuff are also everywhere.
Yeah, and it I mean, in the end, it makes for let's make it possible that everybody makes the most out of themselves, right? And if we can do that by starting at 9:30 or.
But it starts by being open about it, because if everyone would indeed be silent and take this as their own issue with them, struggle all day with them everywhere, then other people will still think everyone wants to be treated like they want to be treated. Like, oh, I want, if there's a problem, say it to me. And I think opening up like this, creating a culture where this is normal, then basically we are like the majority will set the culture. And then the people that cannot cross that bridge, like they are in the end the ones with the disadvantage, not being able to speak to everyone.
And then if anybody listening would like to know more, I really recommend going to Lisa's talk, because it was quite inspiring. Lisa, is there anything that we've missed or anything that you would like to add to what we've already discussed?
I think we did talk about a very broad range of topics. I always love to talk about data lakes, and the cost that comes with that is also extremely interesting, I think. Mm-hmm. Because who hasn't had a database deployed, or maybe Synapse, and then all of a sudden get like a huge bill at the end of the month? So be careful with that.
Yep.
Yeah, I think we talked about a very broad range of topics.
Awesome. Thanks so much for being our guest. I had a blast.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Beta Talks, the podcast. Beta Talks is made possible by Betabit Managed Software Development. See you next time.
Bye.